Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and today we're going to talk about all of the permanent cards in Arkham Horror the card game. This is one of the most powerful types of cards in the game, and we're going to talk about why. As an example, you might be familiar with Charisma right below me, one of my favorite cards in the game, but we're going to talk about all the cards and sort it a bit by their function, what they do for your decks, to help you think about them. There's quite a few cards, so we'll go over them one by one, but first let's go over all the rules. So as you can see on the screen here, permanent is a deck building keyword ability. A card with the permanent keyword does not count towards your deck size. Usually your deck size is about 30 cards. When you add a permanent card to it, that does not affect it. It is still effectively part of your deck, even though it's not in the shuffled together deck at the beginning of the game. So that's the second bullet point. It has to adhere to all other deck building restrictions. Charisma here is a neutral card, so that's not going to be a problem for investigators, but we're going to see lots of other cards from the different classes that still have the permanent keyword. As it says, the next bullet point, a card with the permanent keyword starts each game in play and is not shuffled into your investigator deck during setup. So take it aside. It's like your investigator card. It's not going to be part of your shuffled together deck. And that's actually really, really powerful that it starts in play. You'll always see it. Next, a card with a permanent keyword cannot leave play except for when you're eliminated from the game. This also means that you cannot discard it for any purposes such as treacheries. You can't discard it for any other reason. Also, you cannot remove it from your deck. Once you've added it to your deck, that's it. You can't take it out. That's okay because most of these cards are strictly upsides. They are benefits and they won't have any sort of bad effect. There's some exceptions, so be a little bit careful about adding those into your deck if you don't really want the drawbacks, but generally, they're all really powerful cards. First off, unlike other cards, you're always going to see them. They're sometimes very expensive permanent cards, as we'll see, and when you add expensive cards to your deck, you spend a lot of XP on them, you want to see them. You want to make sure that they are part of your game plan going forward and not just wasted because you weren't able to draw through your deck enough to find the card. Permanent cards, though, they start in play. They are always active. You always get their benefits, and you don't need to worry about, oh, if I only had this card, this scenario, I would have done better. No, these are always going to be there. So that is an extremely powerful effect. It's a very dangerous effect, right? That you have to balance these cards around that. So some of the effects we'll see, especially with the ones that are lower levels, don't seem like they do a whole lot. But remember, you always get them. You don't have to play them. There's no action cost. There's no resource cost. They do in their upper left-hand corner, they usually have a hyphen through where the cost would be. So they don't really have a cost, but they're still assets. They still count as being in play for anything that cares about how many assets you have in play. But the mere fact that you're not paying action or a resource cost for these cards is kind of huge. We're going to see a few cards that actually have non-permanent analogs. They have actual versions of the card that you could put into your deck. And that's kind of an interesting comparison of how much XP does it cost for a card that you normally could play to not have an action resource cost or needing to find it in the deck. Next, it's kind of an addition to your base ability. Think about permanent cards as another thing your investigator card it has on it, but there's just not space for it. It's like you're adding a little bit to your base ability. In fact, some investigators have this essentially built in that there isn't enough room on the card, so you have something like Preston's Family Inheritance, which is a permanent card that just always starts in play. This is where he collects all of his money. Wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense to have it on his investigator card too, but so there are some other investigators that have other permanent cards that come with them that are essentially, man, if only we had enough space on the investigator card, we could have all of this stuff too. So it's a good way to frame all the normal permanent cards that they give you an extension or addition to your base ability too. And lastly, I really like this. When you're upgrading your cards, sometimes it's really tough to decide, okay, I want to put this level 3 card in my deck, but what am I going to take out to make room for that? My deck was already functioning, at whatever level I'm at before, but it's really tough to decide how am I going to keep all that functionality while upgrading something really good without taking something out that's going to be crucial to how things function. That's not always a huge problem, but think of permanent cards as being a nice benefit that you don't have to think about that. You don't need to remove anything from your deck when you're upgrading. You want to slap that charisma in there? No problem. You don't need to take anything else out. So that's quietly a nice reason to take them while you're upgrading if you're not able to solve those other conundrums about what do I take out? Well, why not put a permanent card in instead? All right. Now I'm going to go through all the different types of permanent cards in terms of their function. One of the most common ones, of course, is slots, getting extra slots. And it's not common because there's a lot of cards. It's common because we see this functionality really early in the game's lifespan. Charisma and Relic Hunter both came out in the Dunwich Legacy and then were reprinted in the revised core set. So everyone has access to these, and if you have Dunwich, you have even extra copies, which is good. There's no limit one for each of these. You could put two in a deck, and I'm sure we've all had investigators that were like, I think we're just going to live the 3 ally slot life. We want to have 2 copies of Charisma. Some of the cards we'll see do have a limit 1 per deck, so keep an eye out for that. But let's talk about why these are such important cards. In Arkham Horror the card game, you start with a base of 1 ally slot and 1 accessory slot. You have 2 hand slots, you have 2 arcane slots, but the accessory and ally slots are really, really powerful cards. These are going to be things like your beat cops, your laboratory assistants. They give you also additional soak, which can be very important. And sometimes it's stuff like I want my Leo DeLuca in play, but I also want to get the benefit of something else. I don't want to get rid of Leo DeLuca. He's doing so much for me. Well, if you have Charisma, you can have them both in play at the same time and not worry about your extra ally in your hand just sort of eating up some space. Now, it's not just that. It's also that they have disproportionately printed more ally cards and accessory cards for the slots that you have as a base. There's about 80 different accessory slot items, and I think about 100 or a little bit more than that ally cards in the game. This is over many, many cycles, right? And we still just have the 1 ally slot until you buy Charisma. Compare that to, say, like the body slot, which you have a base 1 body slot as well, but I think there's only about 30 cards that fill the body slot. So the competition for these slots is a lot higher. Arcane slots, you have 2 of those, and I think there's roughly the same number as allies. I think there's about 100 there too. That means that you have no problem filling out your arcane slots as you do with the charisma, or with the ally slots without charisma. The other problem with allies in particular, this doesn't happen as much with the other slots, but a lot of allies have a name which makes them unique cards. So it's harder to get them into play. Whereas with the arcane slots, you could have 2 copies of, say, Shriveling in play, no problem. So that's actually maybe a reason not to have Charisma if you have a bunch of the allies that have exactly the same name, but the same token, you kind of want to have Charisma to get them both in play since they're so powerful. Relic Hunter has been more powerful of late. They've printed far more accessory slots than they did at the beginning of the game's lifespan. And again, that's just like a question of the very powerful effects rogues have Lucky Cigarette Case. You want them in addition to some other thing you put in the accessory slot. So if you've got, I'm running a Jenny deck right now that is looking to put Red Clock into play, but it's helpful to find Red Clock by getting a Lucky Cigarette Case into play as well. And if you find one before the other, you kind of say, well, actually, I need both of these things. So having just a 3 XP tax onto having both in your deck is totally fine. Now, not for every deck. I wouldn't just do this if you're only running, 1 copy of 2 things. You really want to have a good density of these kinds of cards in your deck to make it worthwhile. Or the card draw to find these cards to fill out the slots earlier rather than later. Now, these aren't the only cards that give you extra slots. We take a look at the next page. These are much more recent cards that they've tried to give us more slots. Occult Reliquary is fairly new from the last cycle, Feast of Hemlock Vale. This one gives you an additional accessory slot as well as Relic Hunter, but it also gives you something that we can't get any other way from permanent cards, which is an additional hand slot or arcane slot. There's a limitation one per deck. And whatever you stick in those slots, it has to have the blessed or cursed trait. Totally fine in Feast of Hemlock Vale because we were given a lot of blessed and cursed assets. This is a really nice addition to having another hand slot, which can be tough. I've heard a lot of people who are playing the new Marion Tavares, who has one fewer hand slot. She's got one hand. Take this and then stick in a weapon like Blessed Blade 4, essentially giving her back that extra hand slot. So I think this is a good card. You only get one again, but that's okay. Another limit one over here on the right, in the middle, is Miskatonic Archaeology Funding. This one now you get 2 additional ally slots, which can only be used to hold Miskatonic assets. There's a drawback though. And that is that when you take damage or horror, no more than one of that damage or horror can be assigned to a Miskatonic asset. So you have your extra laboratory assistant, your Dr. Milan, whatever it might be. If you take damage or horror, you can only put one of it onto a Miskatonic asset. But you're basically getting 2 charismas for +1 XP instead of 2 charismas for 6 XP. So you're saving yourself 2 XP by doing this. Of course, you can also have charisma on top of this if you want the full army of allies in your deck. Okay, last one over here is pretty new. This one gives you essentially an extra hand slot to hold a tome asset. So Library Pass level 5 is an upgrade to a level 1 version, but this one's permanent. It's otherwise very similar card. I won't talk about it too much, but you're allowed to essentially just have a free hand slot for a tome. There might be some tomes that take up non-hand slots. I don't remember off the top of my head if there are any. And maybe we'll get one in the future that's like a tome that is an accessory slot. But in practice, this is taking up no hand slots. Okay, that's slots. The other permanent card that was introduced in the Dungeon Legacy, very, very common, as we had a whole cycle of them, in fact, are permanent cards that improve your skill value. So I've called them skill boosts here because that makes the most sense for these first 5 cards. Keen Eye, Higher Education, Streetwise, Scrapper, and Blood Pact on the next page. All of these, as you can see here, are just a permanent ability to be able to spend resources to get a bonus to 2 of your skills. And they can be like any other of these resource to skill pumps. You can do them more than once, right? You can spend 2 resources on Streetwise and get +3 for this test on Intellect or Agility, or you could spend 4 resources and get +6, or more than that, however much you want to spend. Now, the 2 in the middle and the right, Higher Education and Streetwise, were considered to be wildly powerful, and they got some hard-hitting taboos during the middle of this game's lifespan, where you had to spend an initial, I think, 5 and then maybe 3 XP for Higher Education and Streetwise, and maybe even that got toned down a bit after a while because they were so ubiquitous. Higher Education is nuts. This card is not tabooed anymore, so pay 3 XP, put it in your deck. All it asks is that you have 5 cards in your hand, which is not too bad for most Seekers, and you get to spend 1 resource for +2 on 2 pretty relevant stats. A card just does so much. This is kind of in lieu of putting in skill cards. You don't need a perception when you just spend literally 1 resource to get most of the benefits of perception, and you get to do it over and over again, every skill test until the end of time if you want. Streetwise is also a very good value, right? 2 resource for +3 is pretty incredible. This one doesn't ask you to have any sort of number of cards in hand or anything like that, so that's quite good. Keen Eye on the left, this is the one that the Guardians got, has still not really found a good home. This one allows you to spend 2 resources for +1, but it lasts until the end of the phase. So if you're taking, say, 3 attacks, you can spend just 2 resources and get +1 for all of those attacks. That's reasonable, but maybe not worth it in the long run because you're spending probably a lot of money for just getting +1, which you could use on other things. And Guardians always seem to be pretty strapped for cash, so it's not great, but it is a way for them to improve their intellect ability and maybe get some clues, chip in that way. So it's not a terrible card, but it really doesn't have a good home, and it seems a bit expensive for what it does. But there is a dream of taking, 5 or 6 actions. Maybe you're playing Leo Anderson and you get Leo DeLuca and you get lots of other rogue effects that give you extra actions. Then it starts to look a little bit better. But it's less usual than the very easy higher education streetwise cards here that ask very, very little of you to set up. Now, I mentioned that all 3 of these cards, as well as the ones we'll look at in the next page, have level 0 equivalents. These came out either in the Innsmouth Conspiracy or in the starter decks, the investigator starter decks. I think Stella Clark has the scrapper level 0 version. Some of them cost 0, some of them cost 2. It's an interesting thing you have to deal with. If you really want this effect, you could have it at level 0, but having it just always in play is way, way stronger. Okay, I think Scrapper may have gotten a 1 XP taboo at one point. This card is pretty much no frills, 1 resource for +1. It's still really good in decks that want to spend down the resources. And that Survivor kind of does that. They've got the Dark Horse card, we'll see it in a second too, that says, hey, just spend some resources, get a better chance of passing the test, no problem. Now, Blood Pact on the right is actually a totally different card. This is not a card that you use your resources to boost up your skill value. Instead, you have to add Doom to it, and then you get a pretty big benefit, +3, for either your willpower or your combat. Good. Problem is, how do you get rid of the Doom once it's there? So the play pattern for this card is often you don't use it until it's the witching hour, so the turn before Doom matters. And that's pretty good. You can just get a few times per game. You get a +3 or to a couple of skill tests. That seems really good. Or you have ways of clearing off the Doom. We're going to see one later in the video, but there's also things like Moonlight Ritual. Some other abilities may remove Doom from cards as well. I don't think this saw a whole lot of play in the early game when this card came out, but since they have a little bit more with Doom play and, well, investigators that care about Doom in play, the card has gotten a little bit better. So Marie, Amina. Now, the level 0 version is actually more interesting because you can remove the card from play too, because it is not a permanent card. And that one I think costs 2 or something like that, and Dexter really likes that card because he can remove it from play after using it. I think it gives you +2 instead of +3, but just totally different idea. Since this permanent card can't leave play, you need a different way of removing the Doom. All right, these are a few more cards that have a lot to do with passing tests. I briefly alluded to Dark Horse a second ago. There is a non-permanent version of Dark Horse as well. It came out in Dunwich, but now there's a permanent version. And for 5 XP, you just have this additional ability that if you don't want to gain any resources, you don't have to during the upkeep phase. But if you don't have any resources, you get +1 to everything. The whole time you have nothing, in your resource pool, you get +1 to each of your skills. So if you have 5 XP to burn, you can just put this in your deck and choose whether or not you actually want to have this. And in Survivor, there's, not all that much that you can spend your XP on, so you might as well at a certain point in the game. Very good card. It also has the strength of, well, since this is always in play, you don't need to worry about finding your level 0 Dark Horse and putting that into play before all of your other synergies with Dark Horse get to take off. So this is a very strong, the level 0 version is exactly the same, but it costs you 5 XP for this to be something that is always in play. And that feels about right. It feels like that is a good addition. I think it costs 3 resources to put Dark Horse into play in the first place. It's also saving you a play action and 3 resources and finding that card every single game. Okay, Quick Learner, name of the channel, is kind of a funny way of boosting your skill value. It doesn't exactly do that. It reduces the difficulty of tests. I'm sure you are familiar with this card already. The one downside is you don't put this into your deck unless you want that you want that ability to reduce skill tests, and you don't mind the ability to maybe increase the skill test on the first action you take. So you can take 2 of these. It gives you +2 difficulty in the first action, -2 for the third and fourth and fifth if you're taking more actions. That these stack very, very well. So very, very good card. Makes some very, for in my opinion, really interesting play styles. So yeah, this is a very powerful thing you can do with 4 XP or probably 8 XP, especially in Stella Clark where the card came out. Lastly, we have Soul Sanctification, which is just really a card that's a payoff for a crazy amount of healing. And you can turn extra healing, maybe healing that you don't need on anyone, into +2 skill value for future tests. You actually can spend 2 offerings on a test also. So you're potentially looking at a +4 for all of this extra healing you might be doing. That's all I'll say about that card. I think it's a reasonable card for someone like Carolyn Fern or Vincent Lee who do lots of healing, bigger play groups maybe. Otherwise, it's just fine. This was, I think, our first exceptional card we've seen in this video so far. So it is not a 3 XP card. This is a level 3 card, but it will cost you 6 experience points to put into your deck. Speaking of experience points, one of the biggest source of permanent cards is cards that have to deal with experience points, getting you extra experience points or reducing the cost of putting new cards into your deck, or any cards really. So this first one here is a very basic one. This is new from the Drowned City called The Great Work, and this one just says you get additional XP after every scenario in the campaign. There's a catch. I'm not going to show it here, but if you do get defeated during a scenario, you are usurped by the homunculus, and that turns you into a different investigator card altogether, and that's kind of bad. We're going to see a similar card in a second, but there's a cost to maybe getting an extra XP every time. Don't die. Arcane Research was the original here, though. It came out in the Forgotten Age, and there's been a lot of ink spilled or podcast minutes spent talking about how this card has warped the Mystic class. And it has kind of a sibling over on the right, down the rabbit hole. This card allows you to reduce the cost of the first spell card you upgrade between each scenario by 1. And you can have 2 of these. So you can reduce it by 2. You have a Ward Protection level 0. You want to upgrade it to Ward Protection level 2. It's going to cost you nothing. So over the course of a 8 scenario campaign, you essentially with 2 of these get 14 XP. Maybe necessary for how expensive spells are in Mystic, and the 2 mental trauma doesn't really matter, but it's just been a staple in the class ever since it was released, and probably a lot of other things have been warped around this idea. Down the Rabbit Hole is a little bit more interesting in the sense that it doesn't have to be spell cards. It could be anything, but it requires you to actually do an upgrade. It has to be, Ward Protection 0 to 2, and anything else that you throw into your deck, anything at all, that didn't have the same name as a card already existing, they increase the experience cost by 1. The card seems balanced because of that, but it ends up being a little, in my opinion, kind of boring because you just have the same basic idea for the deck. And as the card pool has gotten a lot bigger, it's easier and easier to do this because there's a lot more cards that have an upgraded version of them. The other part of it is that you can put all 3 of these cards in the same deck. You probably shouldn't do that because you will have way more XP than you should have after even the first couple scenarios compared to what the campaign expects you to do. What I mean by that is, even just down the rabbit hole has a bit of a snowball effect, that you're getting some experience cost reduction now, but it will allow you to get more XP and do better in those earlier scenarios to offset maybe later in the campaign when you do have to pay that tax for purchasing cards with different titles, so new cards. So even on its own, right, it has a bit of a problem where you are getting much more ahead of the game with more XP. Now, if you have all three of these, plus other stuff we'll look at in a second, you're getting that much more ahead, right? Instead of getting maybe 5 to 8 XP in the first scenario, if you're getting essentially the equivalent of like 10 to 13 or more, now you are able to do things that the game is not scaled to do. So while it feels like, from many players' perspectives, like, of course, why would I not do this? I would like to get as much XP as I possibly can. It's a co-op game, right? Sometimes we have to police ourselves. Here's some more. In the thick of it, this card has been kind of ubiquitous as well. You get to have it at deck creation, which I suppose I should have mentioned all three of the other ones are purchase at deck creation as well, so you can't add these in later in the campaign. You only do it when you build your deck initially. Limit 1 per deck. When you purchase it, you get some combination of trauma, and you get 3 experience points that you can immediately spend to put into cards in that initial deck. That is, once you get pretty good at the game, the trauma doesn't matter so much, or at least you can offset it with other ways. If you're trying to build certain kinds of decks where you need to have some cards at the beginning, and those level 0 cards just aren't good replacements, then this feels kind of necessary. You want to get that jump start. And with Down the Rabbit Hole itself, it helps you maybe get those cards that are level 1 or level 2 that upgrade into higher level cards, especially the ones that came Edge of the Earth, which of course both these cards came out in. There's a lot of level 1 cards like Brand of Cthulhu, Blur, Divination that have an upgraded version. You want to take in the thick of it to start with, maybe 3 of those cards, and then you get the Down the Rabbit Hole benefit for upgrading into the level 4 versions. If you didn't have in the thick of it, you would have to purchase the level 1 card for 2 XP, and then you get the reduction again when you go from level 1 to level 4. In the thick of it essentially bypasses that issue. It just kind of goes everywhere. It's a bit of a problematic card in that sense. The trauma is not that big of a deal. It can be. It can be for some campaigns and some investigators, but generally that 3 XP will do more for you at the beginning of the game than the trauma will be a downside later in the campaign. The beginning of the campaign is always the most important. Gets the ball rolling. Okay, Aesthetic. This is a card that just came out in the Drowned City, which is a bit of an interesting one. It just says do the opposite of whatever we just said. Gain 10 experience, but you don't get any more experience the rest of the campaign. Now, you can combo with the rest of the stuff we just talked about. You can have in the thick of it, so you really have 13. You can have Down the Rabbit Hole if you can manage to reduce, and Arcane Research managed to reduce the upgrade cost to 0. Then you don't need to earn new experience. You're just basically reducing the upgrade cost to nothing, and you can still do the upgrades. You also could hold back some experience to do that. And then where you get still the bonus between scenarios, because I'll just go back to it. The Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research reduce between scenarios. So if you have some XP held back, you can then use it between scenarios to get that reduction, but still have XP to use that on. Okay, last one over there. This one is Karen's Obol. This is another card that's very much like the Great Work, where you just get XP. It costs you 2 XP to put into your deck, which you could just have within the thick of it, but you get 2 XP after every scenario. So it pays itself back after, a few scenarios. Downside, don't get defeated. If you do, game over for you. Can be a little bit of a toxic card where people then might have to play differently to keep you alive. And some people probably don't want to play that way. They're like, that's your problem. I'm not going to come fix your problem because you took a chance on this card. But as I said before, XP is kind of a snowball effect. The more you get at the beginning, the harder it is for you to get defeated later. If you're Dexter Drake, you can take literally every card we just saw here and that's probably not a great thing. These are a few other cards that have something to do with XP. Shrewd Analysis is a permanent card that allows you as a seeker to upgrade a research card to have 2 copies of the level, usually it's 3 or 4 card. You don't know which one you're going to get, but you get that extra copy, well, both copies, but you only spend, say, 3 XP for 2 copies. So Strange Solution was one of the first ones. I believe those are 4 XP each, and there's a couple different versions. There's one that does damage, there's one that evades, there's one that heals. You generally want to go for kind of one of these in the sets, but if you can save 3 XP or 4 XP to get just 2 copies and they're all kind of good, then this is a fine choice. It's a little cheesy, but as it says here, you must still meet all deck building requirements. There are some cases like Carolyn Fern, who, when upgrading Ancient Stones, which she can take the level 1 version of, to the level 4 versions, there's only one she could possibly take, because only one of them heals horror. The rest of them don't meet her deck building requirements. So technically, the versions are chosen at random from your eligible options. You would only get the 2 copies of the Ancient Stones that heal horror. So it's pretty much a no. There's no reason to not do this. For everyone else, I feel like Dream Diary is okay, but in the most recent research cards that have come out, they've kind of tried to squash this idea by only giving you limit 1 per deck of the research cards. So the most recent one, which is the Dial of the Ancients, that one has like 3 or 4 versions, I think, and you only get limit 1 per deck for all of them, so this will never help you. Sad. Deja Vu. This is part of the Exile archetype, which is not played so much, but if you happen to want to spend 5 XP to reduce the cost of repurchasing exiled cards, 3 of them, I guess that's good if you're exiling 3 cards over the course of a bunch of scenarios. Then you'll get your XP back. That's just not a style I've ever really seen, but it's here. And then Adaptable is maybe the strangest inclusion in this list. If you didn't know, if you add a level 0 card to your deck after the first scenario, after deck creation, you must pay a tax of minimum 1 XP. So if you add a 2 XP card, you just pay 2 XP. If you add a level 0 card, though, which has no XP associated with it, you still must pay 1 XP. So most of the time people say, I'm not doing that. I would rather just put in a 1 XP card if I'm going to spend 1 XP. But sometimes you kind of need a level 0 card. They aren't always duplicated in their function at the higher levels. So that's where Adaptable comes into play. If you're rogue or have rogue access at level 1, you can spend 1 XP once, and every time in the future that you want to do upgrades, you may swap out 2 level 0 cards for an equal number of level 0 cards. Actually, I guess you could do this twice. You could have 2 copies of this permanent card if you want to swap out 4 cards. Not a terrible idea. This is really nice for Jenny Barnes because she has a bunch of off-class options exactly at level 0. Finn Edwards is kind of the same idea. You might feel like you need a different thing for, say, teching for a different scenario. A lot of people who play the game have kind of house ruled this to be a neutral card, or just say that after scenario 1, if your deck really wasn't working the way you expected to, just do this. Just give people the ability to swap out level 0 cards for other level 0 cards, but rules as written, you have to spend that 1 XP, and this gives rogues a little bit of a niche for being indeed adaptable. So it's in the experience point section because it's kind of saving you 2 XP, assuming you want to do this every scenario, which is, a really forward-thinking deck builder probably doesn't need to, but I've never had a campaign where I didn't at least think about it, where I'm like, that actually might be worth doing, not because I made a mistake, but because I want to tech for a scenario that's coming up. For 1 XP, I think it's not a big deal. Now we have what I'm going to call economy cards. Pretty loose here. The first two cards are obviously having to do with gaining cards or drawing cards or gaining resources. Studious is a really sick card that says you begin each game with one additional card in your opening hand. That means when you're doing the mulligan, if you have one of these, you get to draw 6. You're seeing that much further into your deck. So if you don't like those 6, you dump them, draw another 6. You've seen into 12 cards of your deck. That's nearly half. If you have 2 of them, right, now my opening hand is 7. If I don't like any of those, I'm now looking basically 14 cards into my deck. That is basically half. Now, it also means you just start with more cards in play and or in your hand, which is good for seekers who care about big hand. But I think the card is just really, really solid. Another Day, Another Dollar also came out in the same set. I think they're both Circle and Done for sure. This one just says you start with 2 additional resources. Great. You can have 2 of these, start with 9 resources instead of 5. The kind of joke is that there's a basic weakness called Indebted, which makes you start with, I think, 2 fewer resources in general. And you can solve that weakness, which is also permanent, by the way. I should have put it in the list because it's a permanent card too. Anyway, it solves it with 3 XP and another permanent card. Kind of funny. Anyway, these are both very traditional economy cards. The rest of the ones we're going to see are not so traditional, but these 2 cards are just really, really solid. I don't want to say that it's hard to not include them because there might be better things or more flashier things you want to do with your XP. And you also kind of think about like, what is the long-term benefit of these cards? If you buy them early, it feels like you haven't really improved your deck that much. But what you've done is you've now had a compounding effect that every other scenario you play is going to have this too. So it's kind of weird. Like the earlier in the campaign you buy them, the better, because you get the benefit more. That 3 XP is being compounded. But on the other hand, like what else is in your deck that you need the extra resources and extra card for? You better have something pretty good to do with them. So it's tough. I mean, I like them in mid-campaign, like scenario 4 or 5, kind of to solve that balance issue. You don't have such a choice for short supply. Or the next few cards too. This has to be purchased at deck creation as well. And the forced effect when your first turn of the game begins, discard the top 10 of your deck. It sounds like this is just a bad thing, but if you know anything about recursion and survivors, then actually this is an upside. You are using your discard pile in a lot of survivors as an extra hand, almost like the different deck, that you have more control over because you're more likely to pull things out of the discard pile of your choice, right? Your draw deck is unknown. We have no idea what cards and in what order they are or that they're coming out. The discard pile, not so much. You can play things from it pretty much at will in these kinds of investigators. So it's essentially like drawing another 10 cards that don't count against my hand size. Kind of. If you don't have ways to get certain cards out of it, then that's not good. But at the same time, sometimes that's okay. You have knowledge about what is in the discard pile. You know what's there, therefore you know what's left in the deck. But kind of an auto take in York. Some other survivors for sure, but not everyone. Some people will argue that it's like if whatever's there, pretend it was the bottom 10 cards of your deck. You weren't going to see them anyway. And my answer to that is, that's not true. You will see them in most survivors, right? There's enough card draw now, and it's easier to search for things in your deck with things like backpack or, well, I don't know what else, but other things that may allow you to search for things out of your deck. You can't just do that if those cards in your discard pile, if you can't get them out. So there is a downside here. I would not take this in some investigators. I'm too scared to take it in Wendy because if your weakness, which deletes everything in your discard pile, like remove from the game, delete, is not in those top 10, then you are going to be drawing that quicker than you would have otherwise. And it's not just that that is bad to draw the weakness, it is bad because now suddenly your game is very, very hampered. So I wouldn't do it personally. I know some people have, and they just say, I'll take the chance, but I don't think the benefit for Wendy is enough. I think a lot of investigators can just get stuff into the discard pile quickly enough that it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. Okay, we have some more from Edge of the Earth. Geared Up. This one is funny because you lose all your actions in your first turn, but instead you get to play any number of item assets from your hand, reducing the cost by 1. So it's essentially giving you extra resources and extra actions if you can, especially if you can get more than 3 things down. There's a taboo on this to be 5, maximum of 5 item assets you play. But really, if you just play a deck that has a good chunk of assets that are items, you've got a backpack down, you have Schaffner's catalog to pay for everything, it's fine. There are some campaigns or scenarios where this is like bad because you just lose everything in your first turn, but that's okay. Forced learning, this one kind of is like drawing an extra card. You're kind of looking at 2 and deciding which one's the best. So it's kind of economy. I don't have much to say here. The card to me is not appealing, but in investigators that have some kind of synergy with their discard pile, this looks a little bit better. Okay, last one on your own. This one has a downside that you can't have any assets that take up an ally slot in your deck, but you get a really strong benefit that once per round, this is actually one of the few permanent cards we've seen that has some kind of reaction on it. In fact, you have to exhaust this card. It doesn't just like, you can't just hide this card somewhere. But you get to reduce the event's cost by 2. So if you have things like Look What I Found, Dumb Luck, these things all cost 2. And what if they didn't cost anything? That's really good. I think there's not as much support for this card as I'd like. It's fine not to have allies. You can get them there in other places. I usually play a chance encounter in this to get allies from other people. But there's a lot of soak in Survivor, so it's not that big of a deal. But I don't think there's as many events that cost a lot. There's Trial by Fire, there's True Survivor, but it's kind of tough to play this a lot and make use of the money. Kind of neat with maybe Dark Horse though, right? You can have no resources and still play some events that cost something. Neat card. Okay, moving on to a set of cards that are all kind of side decky, meaning that they allow you to have a separate hand. It's not really a hand, but before you draw your opening hand on Stick to the Plan, you get to search your whole deck for up to 3 different tactics and or supplies and attach them there. So this just says every scenario you begin with 3 cards of your choice that are tactics or supplies. That's really, really good. You can't play them all at once. You need to exhaust Stick to the Plan to use them, but a lot of people just have, for example, an economy card, emergency cash maybe, Ever Vigilant. This is a card that allows you to play assets, 3 of them for -1 cost. Level 4 even better. And then maybe something that solves a big problem, like a Dynamite Blast. If you want to look for weapons, you can put Prepared for the Worst on here. There's some different things you can do. I feel like there's kind of like 4 or 5 things that most people stick to, but I think Ever Vigilant is really hard not to put on to Stick to the Plan because you don't need to use it until you have 3 assets you want to play. Usually that'll be turn 1, but it's hard to align cards with cards in your hand in this game sometimes. But if you always know I'm going to get Stick to the Plan will have Ever Vigilant, then I just need to make sure I have 3 assets in my hand, maybe my opening hand, and then let's go, we play it right now. Very strong card, worthy of that exceptional trait there. Actually, all 3 of these have that. They're all level 3 exceptional. Bewitching is a very similar idea for rogues. This time you're picking trick cards, 3 different trick cards. But the way you get them off of the card is different. You have to engage an enemy. And now you have a choice. You can either just take the card off of Bewitching, or you can find another copy of the card in the top 9 cards of your deck. And it is a very fun playstyle to think about, which one do I want to do? Do I play this more like Stick to the Plan, or do I use this as like a deck thinner? Maybe I have like 3 copies of Easy Mark or something. I got one on Bewitching, and then I'm looking for the other 2 constantly as I'm going through my deck a few times. That's kind of cool. There are some trick assets that are pretty useful for this. Dirty Fighting is a trick asset, so maybe it just sits there, right? And you say, well, until I draw an enemy, I don't really need this card. And when I do draw an enemy, I get this card every single game. So remember at the beginning of the video, I said how permanent cards themselves are powerful because you get their ability every game. You don't have to draw them. These cards, Bewitching and Stick to the Plan specifically, kind of turn other cards into permanents. Not exactly, since you still have to pay their action cost and their resource cost, but they solve the problem of something is stuck in my deck somewhere. We're going to see one more card like that very soon. Okay, Ancestral Knowledge is a bit different. This one, it's not specific skill cards that you get, but rather 5 random ones. So before you draw your opening hand, you get 5 random non-weakness skills attached face down, and then during the game, you can exhaust this, draw one of those cards. You get to look, you know what those 5 are. It's not one random card. You draw whichever one might be good at that time. It also, interestingly, increases your deck size by 5. So while Stick to the Plan and Bewitching decrease the number of cards in your deck, which helps with the consistency of everything else, Ancestral Knowledge doesn't do that. It says, okay, we're going to give you a benefit of, your choice of which, well, not your choice, but 5 really good skill cards probably that you can pull out at any time. But it's not going to make your deck size any smaller or any thinner, which is probably fine in Seekers who just blitz through their deck anyway. It's kind of funny in this card, though, because once you've used those skills, they go in your discard pile, and now your deck actually is bigger. Important thing to note, and you'll see this for another card in a second too, it says your deck must include at least 10 skills. When you buy this, you can then add extra cards to get to that 10 skill threshold. Your deck size is increased by 5. That should give you, presumably you had 5 skills beforehand, that should give you extra cards so you can add up to 10 skills. Pretty easy to get that, and I found that the card is just good. It's expensive, but it's always going to be worth it if you have nothing else better to do. Okay, 2 more. I kind of touched on the idea of adding to your deck size, so I won't talk about that again, but Underworld Market is a card that basically says, here's a set of 10 illicit cards, that's your side deck, and you'll go through them looking at 2 at a time every round. If you want to draw these cards, it'll cost you 1 resource, which is actually quite good. 1 resource for 1 free card every round, or you don't even have to, just kind of sort through until you get the ones that you really want, is a great deal, especially in rogues. I had a hard time before this card got tabooed to plus 2 XP, which is 6 XP in total, to not put it into a lot of decks. I like somewhat through a campaign making my deck size larger so I can add some more level 0 stuff in that I missed out on before, and it doesn't affect the deck size, right? The regular deck, because those 10 cards are going into this side deck. So I really like this card. And then the newest one of the bunch, Eldritch Brand, is kind of a souped up version of what we've seen for like Stick to the Plan or Bewitching. So this one costs you 10 XP, which is an absurd amount. However, when you purchase the card, you choose a non-signature spell asset in your deck, and this is your branded spell. Your deck gets only 1 copy of this. So let's pretend it's, shriveling, right? Before you draw your opening hand, you search your deck for your branded spell. Again, it's just 1 of those, and you play it, paying its cost. So it's saving you a draw. It's saving you an action, and kind of unheralded part of this, it's saving you the XP that you might have spent for a second copy. Now, Shriveling's maybe not the best example because you might need more than one copy since it runs out of charges, presumably. But if you spend 5 XP on that, you're not spending 5 XP on a second copy. That's like pretty decent, especially since Eldritch Brand itself is so darn expensive. But it's allowing you to find a card, play it every single scenario of the campaign. And that is powerful. It better be worth it though, because you could be spending your XP doing other things, but as a permanent card, you don't need to spend that XP to try to find the card and taking up a deck space, a deck slot, which to me, I think deck slots are very competitive these days. So having a permanent card that is a tutor is quite strong. I don't know if 10 XP is strong, but very good. Okay, I don't want to talk about these too much. This is a whole cycle from the Innsmouth Conspiracy that are called covenants. Every class got one. They're all exactly 2 XP, and you only get to add one to your deck. You could never have more than one. All of them have something to do with blesses and curses. The Sacred Covenant and the Ancient Covenant, the blue and red ones here, are about bless tokens. The Sacred Covenant is about leaving bless tokens in that you didn't need to pass the test, so you're trying to get a critical mass of bless tokens in there. If you don't actually need the effect of the bless token, then you leave it in. Ancient Covenant is a absurd card that just lets you stop drawing after you get that +2, which prevents you from drawing other stuff that might fail you the test. Paradoxical Covenant is this paradoxical build where you're trying to draw both bless and curse tokens in the same step, same skill test rather, and if you do, you automatically succeed the test, which is good, but it requires a lot of other setup. The curse ones are in Seeker and Rogue. So Blasphemous Covenant, this one allows you to mitigate the curses in the way of turning the -2 modifier to a +1, but then you leave the curse back in the bag, which is often what Seekers want to do with curses in the first place, so it's not a bad thing either. False Covenant though, the Rogue one, this one just says if you draw a curse token, you cancel it entirely, get rid of it, it was never there. Very strong effect if there are curses in the bag that are actually going to keep you from passing your skill tests, or in Rogue especially, keeping you from hitting those succeed by thresholds. That's it. These are just whole archetypes on their own, but it is a nice thing to have as a permanent because these cards kind of need to always be active for these effects. Otherwise, I don't think they're worth it. I think it's too much stuff to try to cobble together to make these decks work and do what the scenarios want you to do too. I find that Bless and Curse decks often have a lot of these pieces that are, hogging up the deck slots, and having at least something that's permanent is really good. And finally, the other category. Things that just don't belong in the other categories, in my opinion. Versatile, +5 deck size. So the first two actually have something to deck building. And then your deck building options, you get a level 0 card from any class. So if you're a mono survivor like Stella Clark, but you really want to have Faustian Bargain for some reason, a rogue card that's level 0, cool, take it. Take Versatile, spend your 2 XP. You additionally have to add 4 other cards to the deck too that are, maybe level 0 in Survivor. So now you've got a larger deck size, and that one level 0 card is a bit, harder to find. The card is okay. I think it's okay these days, but back in the day when it came out, people were pretty down on it just for the mere fact that it was diluting your deck. And people's decks weren't as strong. Dream Eaters, they could be plenty strong. But for allowing you to add something from off class, your consistency just goes down. And that's not always a good thing if you don't have ways to mitigate that. You can take 2 of these if you want 2 things that are level 0 from other classes. It's a fun card though, because it does allow you to bring in things from other classes that you wouldn't get access to otherwise. So there's that. Okay, Underworld support, this is kind of the opposite. Now you want your deck to be super consistent because you have -5 deck size. So this one has the downside, though, of you only get one copy of every card. And that's including other permanents. Do you want 2 copies of Charisma? Sorry, you don't get it. You're only going to get 1. So that's a little bit of a maybe unforeseen circumstance there. But these days, the card is pretty okay because you can sort of blitz through your deck pretty quickly. And having more than one copy of a card isn't maybe the biggest deal because you can just have a different similar card. Instead of Faustian Bargain, 2 copies of that, run Faustian and Bank Job. Very similar card. The downside is that sometimes you do need 2 copies of something. You really do want 2 copies of Pickpocketing. You do really want 2 copies of Cigarette Case, maybe. It's maybe easier to find the singleton cards, the ones that you wouldn't otherwise get. So your Black Fan, your Red Clock, cards that came out in this set, of course, with Underworld support. So that's kind of nice. But your deck is going to skew more to the side of weaknesses. So especially if you have multiple weaknesses in your deck, like 3 or something, I would not get this because your deck size is smaller, but more of your deck is going to be weaknesses. I think there's some other math that people have done about like, is it better to have 1 copy out of 25 versus 2 copies out of 30? It's not quite as simple as that, but it depends on like how important each of those assets are. But I think Rogue gets, plenty of card draw. Oh, one other downside with the customizable cards, which are basically balanced around having 2 or even 3 copies of them, they're kind of bad in Underworld support, so don't run them there. Okay, Spiritual Healing, this is a new one. Limit 1 per deck, purchase it, remove 1 trauma. 4 XP. Do you need this? Probably not. Is it? I'm glad it's part of the game. Sure. We have now a way to do this if you're ever in danger of like totally being going insane or being killed. Spend 4 XP to get rid of this, but it's probably not. I mean, for 3 XP, you can put Bulletproof Vest or Elder Sign Amulet in your deck, and those are 4 points of soak. This only kind of saves you 1 point of soak, but it's permanent, so you don't need to find and play those cards. If you have, I don't know, 2 trauma or something and Roland Banks, 2 mental trauma, and you buy this, then a Rotting Remains doesn't instantly kill you. That's good, but maybe solve that problem a different way. Okay, last slide. And what better card than for other than Observed? If you don't have Return to Circle Undone, this is probably just a strange thing to talk about, but it comes with this set of tarot cards. And these tarot cards have effects on them. They have an upright effect and a upside down effect. I forget what that's called. Reversed effect. And you get to look at 3 of them and you choose the positive effect. So you get the upright effect, and they're usually things like you have +1 to a particular stat the first time you test it every round. Maybe you have your first opening hand with more than 1 card or extra card. Elder Sign heals you. There's all kinds of interesting stuff in there, and there's no downside. I purchase this card a lot when I don't want to ruin my deck by pulling something else out. Go back to the thing I said at the very beginning. I have 30 cards in the deck. I really like them. It's not as simple as just going from a level 0 card to a level 3 card that does the same thing. Doesn't always happen. You don't want to upset the balance of everything that's going on in your deck. So sometimes putting in another card, like a 3 or 4 XP card, doesn't actually help you, but Observed will never hurt you, and it usually will do something, I mean, not great, but it's usually good. So, how early do you put Observed into your deck? If it's at the last scenario, you have like 12 XP, or what do I do with this? 4 can go into Observed. Why not? It's a fun card, but if you don't have Return to the Circle Undone, not an option. Drowned City did come up with Locked and Loaded. This is a ability that just has extra ammo on your guns. Note that it doesn't change the uses. It just says that you enter, they enter play with additional ammo on them. So there are cards that care about how many ammo tokens are on them, or the uses rather that is printed, like Swift Reload. It won't change that. This is basically Akachi's ability, which gives you an extra charge on things that come in with charges. But this is for guns. Really good. I think it's really relevant. If you're playing one gun, you probably don't want this. If you're playing 3 or 4 over the course of a scenario, it's really good. So consider that for 3 XP. Only 1 per deck. It'd be neat if you could get 2. And then lastly, we have Sin Eater. This is a 6 XP card that solves all of your Doom problems and actually does some extra things, right? So you move Doom from an asset that you control to Sin Eater. So let's say your Dowsing Rod has 1 Doom on it. You get to move the Doom over, and then as an action, you can remove all the Doom from this card. So you kind of have to factor in the agenda length to figure out how many times you actually need to take the action to remove all Doom versus being able to, once a round, move Doom over to Sin Eater from various assets. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but it's just a very solid way to clear a bunch of Doom. You also get to ready the asset or place a charge on it, which I think is super cool. So for Dowsing Rod, it allows you to then put extra Doom and move again. I suppose that's good if you have Doom to spare. Placing charges may be less relevant for those cards, but even if you're playing Trivialing or something else, might be not a bad thing to add charges to that asset. Yeah, I've used this in Marie as well to just pull Doom from Blood Pact, for example. I think it's a fine use, even though you're not exhausting that asset at all. Okay, hey, that's it. There are no more permanent cards in the game to this point, other than the story assets. There's some story assets, weaknesses, investigator, permanents. There's a few of those. I should have mentioned in the charisma section that another reason why charisma is so good is that a lot of campaigns give out assets that are story assets that are allies, and it's hard to include them in your deck if you don't have room for them, because generally your deck already has an idea for an ally, and having charisma allows you to use that special ability too. That's just a side note on that. But I mean, charisma and Relic Hunter I think are the most powerful ones of generically. I mean, they are neutral cards, but all the rest of them that we've seen today are quite good too. They're very fun, they're very interesting. But just remember, just the fact that you are putting XP into a card that you always get benefit from is huge. So that's it for me today. I think someone had an idea for this video, and I thought it was a really good one. So that's why you got this. I thought about breaking it up into different classes to sort of explore that part of the space. But honestly, they did more in terms of cycles, right? Similar kinds of cards across classes, rather than having each class having their own take on what permanent does. You can especially see that from the side deck ones, where every class gets kind of a version of Stick to the Plan, except for Survivors don't quite have that yet. But maybe they will in the future. Sometimes that's a way to look ahead to see what we might get in the future. That's it. Thanks for people who've supported me over the last few years, and I'll see you in the next video.